Husband lets me open our marriage, then ghosts me and leaves me with nothing. I never imagined that a single decision could lead to such a complete unraveling of my life. Everything started off so well, so filled with love and promise. But today, as I sit here alone, all I have left are memories of what once was, and the cold emptiness that followed. Oliver and I had a beautiful relationship. We met during our college years, bonding over late-night study sessions and our shared love for literature. He was the steady force in my life, always grounded and always reliable. I used to think that no matter what challenges we faced, our love was strong enough to overcome them. But I was wrong. As the years went by, something inside me changed. It wasn't that I didn't love Oliver. I did, deeply. But a part of me longed for something more. Something that felt missing, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I started feeling suffocated, trapped by the very stability I had once cherished. It was then that the idea of an open marriage crossed my mind. At first, it seemed innocent enough, almost like a way to recharge the parts of our relationship that had grown stale. I convinced myself that it could help us reconnect by allowing me to explore the side of myself that felt neglected while still keeping the love I had for Oliver intact. Little did I know that it was a Pandora's box I was about to open. When I brought up the idea to Oliver, his reaction was exactly what I feared. His expression twisted from confusion to anger, and I could see the hurt etched in his eyes. "Why? Am I not enough for you anymore?" he asked, voice trembling with barely contained frustration. I tried to explain that it wasn't about him, that my feelings of restlessness had nothing to do with the love we shared. But the more I spoke, the deeper the chasm between us seemed to grow. What was meant to be a conversation to strengthen our bond ended up fracturing it instead. And yet, despite his initial reluctance, Oliver reluctantly agreed, more out of fear of losing me, I think, than anything else. In that moment, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief because I thought this could be the answer to my internal conflict. Guilt because deep down, I knew I was asking for too much. And now, looking back, I realized that was the beginning of the end. After Oliver agreed, I thought everything would go smoothly. I convinced myself that this new arrangement would be a way to reignite the excitement in my life, all while maintaining the stability I had with him. But from the moment the door to our open marriage creaked open, things started to unravel faster than I could have imagined. At first, it was thrilling. I felt a rush of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. I went on a few dates, indulging in the novelty of meeting new people, but each encounter left me with a strange hollowness. No matter who I was with, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. The freedom I had craved felt more like a trap I had willingly walked into. Oliver and I tried to act like everything was normal. We still had our dinners together. We still shared the same bed, and we still talked about our day-to-day lives. But there was a growing distance between us that neither of us acknowledged, as if by pretending it didn't exist, it would somehow disappear. Then one night, everything changed. I was out on a date with a guy named Ryan, someone I had met through a mutual friend. He was charming, funny, and attentive in ways that Oliver hadn't been lately. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was what I had been missing. But as the evening went on, all I could think about was Oliver. What he was doing, how he was feeling, whether he regretted agreeing to this. The thought of him alone at home twisted my stomach in knots. When I got back that night, Oliver was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. His eyes were glassy, and there was an air of finality about the way he sat there, as if something inside him had broken. "How was it?" he asked, his voice devoid of any real curiosity. "It was fine," I replied, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the tension in the air. He nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I thought I could do this. I thought maybe if I loved you enough, I could handle it. But I can't, Emma. I really can't." My heart sank. There it was, the beginning of the collapse I had feared but had selfishly ignored. Oliver stood up, his expression hardened, and walked to our bedroom without another word. That night, I lay in bed next to him, but we may as well have been miles apart. Something inside Oliver had shifted, and for the first time, I realized that I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. In the days that followed, the tension between Oliver and me was unbearable. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. He withdrew into himself, retreating to his work and barely speaking to me beyond the usual pleasantries. The conversations we used to have, the deep and meaningful ones that built the foundation of our relationship, had vanished. I knew he was hurting, but I didn't know how to fix it. Every time I tried to talk to him, he would brush me off with a simple, "I'm fine." But I could see the pain in his eyes. It was as though he was trying to protect himself from the heartbreak that had already begun to consume him. I, too, felt trapped by my choices, by the weight of the freedom I had wanted. The thrill of the open marriage had already begun to fade, replaced by guilt and a deep sense of regret. But I couldn't admit that to Oliver. Admitting it would mean acknowledging how much I had hurt him, how much I had damaged the bond we shared. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner in silence, I couldn't take it anymore. The air between us was thick with unsaid words, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. "Oliver," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think we need to talk." He didn't look up from his plate, his fork motionless in his hand. "What's there to talk about?" he asked, his voice hollow. This isn't working. I thought it would be different, but it's tearing us apart. I don't want to lose you." At that, he finally looked up, his eyes searching mine for a moment before he let out a bitter laugh. "Emma, I've already lost you. The second you wanted to open our marriage, you walked away from us. You might still be here physically, but we're not together anymore, are we?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him that it wasn't true, that we could still fix this. But deep down, I knew he was right. I had walked away, maybe not intentionally, but by pursuing something outside of us. I had torn apart the foundation we had built. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. I thought it would help us somehow." "Help us?" he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "How was this ever supposed to help us? You wanted something more, something I couldn't give you. And now, look where we are." He pushed his chair back and stood up, walking toward the door. "I need some air," he muttered before stepping outside, leaving me sitting at the table, feeling more alone than ever. I stared at the empty seat in front of me, the weight of my choices crashing down on me. The truth was, I didn't want something more. I wanted what we had, but I had been too blind to see that until it was too late. And now, I was left wondering if there was any way to repair the damage I had caused. Days turned into weeks, and things between Oliver and me grew colder, more distant than I ever imagined possible. He wasn't just pulling away. He was disappearing, little by little. Every day, it felt like I was losing more of him. He would come home late, spend hours locked in his office, and when he wasn't working, he'd find excuses to avoid me. I tried to give him space, hoping that maybe time would help heal the wounds I had inflicted. But the more space I gave him, the more he seemed to drift away, like a ship sailing further out to sea, impossible to reel back. It became clear that he wasn't just upset. He was hurt beyond repair, and I had no idea how to reach him. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Oliver came home later than usual. I sat waiting in the living room, my nerves frayed from the tension that had become our new normal. When he finally walked through the door, he didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, he went straight to the bedroom without a word. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know where we stood. I needed to understand what was happening to us. I followed him into the bedroom, my heart pounding. "Oliver, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What is there to talk about, Emma? You wanted this. You wanted an open marriage. You got what you wanted. Now, what's left to say?" "I made a mistake," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I thought it would make things better, but all it did was tear us apart. I love you, Oliver. I don't want anyone else. I never did. I just felt lost." For the first time in weeks, he looked directly at me, and the pain in his eyes was undeniable. "You felt lost? And what about me, Emma? You think I didn't feel lost too? But instead of working through it together, you decided the answer was to go find someone else." Tears stung my eyes. I know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But I'm here now, and I want to fix this. Please, Oliver, just tell me what I can do. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity before shaking his head. I don't know if there's anything left to fix, he said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. My chest tightened, and panic set in. Please don't say that, I begged. We can go to counseling, we can try, anything. Just don't give up on us. But he didn't respond. Instead, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the silence that had become all too familiar. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the thought of losing him. But what I didn't know was that Oliver had already made his decision. He had already started to plan his exit from my life, and I was too blind to see it. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. It wasn't unusual for Oliver to get up early, but something felt different this time. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of the coffee maker brewing, no clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Just silence. I got out of bed, my stomach churning with anxiety, and walked through the house, calling his name. Oliver? No response. When I reached his office, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, hoping to find him inside, but the room was empty. His desk, usually cluttered with papers and his laptop, was cleared. A single envelope sat on the desk, my name written in his familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. I could feel my heart racing as I slowly tore it open, dreading what I was about to read. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as I unfolded it, my world collapsed around me. Emma, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've tried to make sense of what's happened between us, but I can't. I can't pretend that things can go back to the way they were, and I can't live like this anymore. You wanted freedom, and I gave it to you, hoping that somehow it would bring us closer. But all it did was show me how far apart we've drifted. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. I can't keep living in this house, pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I need to move on, and I think you do too. This isn't the life I want anymore, and I'm not the man I used to be. I hope one day you'll understand why I had to leave. Take care of yourself. Oliver. I read the letter over and over again, my mind struggling to process the words. He was gone. He had left me. After everything we had been through, after all the promises we had made to each other, he was gone. I stumbled back to the couch, clutching the letter in my hands, feeling as though the floor had been ripped out from under me. My heart raced, and tears blurred my vision as the reality of the situation set in. He had disappeared without a word. No goodbye, no final conversation. Just a letter. I had pushed him too far, and now he was gone. For the next few hours, I sat in stunned silence, my mind spinning in circles. Where had he gone? How long had he been planning this? Why didn't he give me a chance to make things right? I tried calling him, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts, begging him to come back, to talk to me, to let me explain. But there was no response. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. Panic set in, and I realized that I had no idea where he was or how to reach him. He had disappeared so thoroughly that I couldn't even begin to trace his steps. The man I had loved for so many years was gone, and I was left with nothing but questions and a deep, sinking feeling that I had lost him forever. The next few days were a blur. I barely ate, barely slept, and spent every waking moment consumed by thoughts of Oliver. I scoured our house for clues, anything that would tell me where he had gone or what he planned to do next, but there was nothing. It was as if he had meticulously erased himself from my life, leaving only the hollow shell of the home we once shared. His clothes were gone, along with a few personal items. His phone number was disconnected. Even his email bounced back. Oliver had cut every line of communication, leaving me completely in the dark. I had never felt so alone in my life. The few friends we shared had no idea what had happened. When I called them in a panic, desperate for answers, they were just as shocked as I was. He never mentioned anything. They told me over and over. We thought everything was fine between you two. Fine. That word haunted me. How could things ever be fine again after what I had done? After what we had become? As the reality of my situation settled in, I had no choice but to start picking up the pieces of my shattered life. The bills were piling up. Oliver had handled most of our finances, and now I was left to manage everything on my own. I couldn't afford our home on my salary alone, and the thought of losing the place we had built together sent a wave of dread through me. I went through the motions like a robot. I called our bank, changed the utilities to my name, and tried to figure out a way to make ends meet. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like I was drowning. Every time I looked at our empty bedroom or the empty spot on the bathroom counter where his things used to be, I was reminded of the life I had destroyed. What hurt the most was the silence. The complete and utter silence of being ghosted by the one person I thought I would grow old with. I kept waiting for him to reach out, to tell me where he was or what he was thinking. But the days turned into weeks, and there was nothing. I found myself going over every moment of the last few months, wondering what I could have done differently. Had I ruined everything the moment I suggested opening our marriage? Was there something I could have said, something I could have done, to make him stay? The guilt was unbearable, suffocating me in ways I hadn't expected. And yet, deep down, I knew I had been selfish. I had asked for more than Oliver could give, and I hadn't considered the weight of my request. Now, I was paying the price, and it felt like the punishment fit the crime. One night, after weeks of searching, I realized something horrifying. I didn't know Oliver anymore. The man I had spent years with, the man who had once shared every thought and dream with me, was now a stranger. And in losing him, I had lost a part of myself. The days dragged on, each one bleaker than the last. I went through the motions of my life, but it felt like I was watching someone else live it. I'd get up, go to work, and come home to a house that felt more like a tomb than the home I once shared with Oliver. Every room was a reminder of what I had lost. The echo of his absence was everywhere. In the quiet mornings without him making coffee, in the evenings where we no longer shared our days. I couldn't stop myself from wondering where he was. Did he leave town? Was he staying with someone? I had no answers, and the more I searched for them, the more they eluded me. I had no way of finding him. He had covered his tracks so well. It was as if he had planned this, carefully removing himself from my life like a ghost disappearing into the night. Friends and family started to notice the change in me. My mother called more frequently, her voice filled with concern. "Emma, you sound terrible. Are you eating? Have you spoken to Oliver?" I lied, telling her I was fine, that everything would work out eventually, but I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I tried to distract myself, diving into work, taking on extra projects, anything to keep my mind off the emptiness inside me. But even that wasn't enough. The thoughts of him consumed me, gnawing at my soul with a relentless hunger. Every night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation over and over in my head. The pain of knowing I had driven him away was unbearable. What was worse was the knowledge that I had brought this on myself. I had pushed him too far, asked for more than he could give. I had taken his love for granted, assuming that no matter what I did, he would always be there. But people aren't invincible. Love isn't endless. It can be worn down, chipped away by selfish choices, until there's nothing left but bitterness and regret. Weeks turned into a month, and there was still no sign of him. My texts went unanswered, my calls ignored. The emptiness was suffocating, and I realized I had no choice but to start living again, without him. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was nothing else I could do. One day, while cleaning out some old boxes in the closet, I came across a picture of us from our early days together. We were so happy, so full of hope and dreams for the future. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, the memory of that time feeling like a lifetime ago. What had happened to us? How had we gotten so far from that joy, that connection? The tears came, and for the first time in weeks, I let them. I sobbed, clutching the picture to my chest, mourning not just the loss of Oliver, but the loss of the life we had built together. The realization that it was truly over, that he was never coming back, crashed down on me like a wave, pulling me under. I had lost everything, and it was all my fault. The pain of Oliver's absence only seemed to grow sharper as time passed. There were moments when I thought I could push through, moments when I convinced myself I was strong enough to move on. But it didn't take much to bring me crashing back down. A memory, a place we used to visit, a scent that reminded me of him, It was all enough to rip open the wounds that had barely begun to heal. One night, as I sat on the couch, drowning in the silence of the house, I decided I couldn't just sit here anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know where he had gone, why he had chosen to ghost me without so much as a conversation about what came next. The thought of him out there, living his life without me, filled me with a bitterness that I couldn't contain. I hired a private investigator, a step I never imagined I'd take. I was desperate for any piece of information, any clue that would lead me to Oliver. It felt strange, underhanded even, to track down the man I loved like this, but I was out of options. I had lost control of my life, and I needed something, anything, to hold on to. The investigator, a man named Phil, was professional and to the point. "I'll find him," he said, handing me a business card with his details. "Give me a few days, and I'll get back to you." Those few days were agony. I felt guilty for hiring someone to track Oliver down, but the need to know where he was burned inside me. I wasn't ready to face the reality of living without him, and the thought that he might have started a new life, a life where I didn't exist, was too much to bear. When Phil called me a few days later, I felt a mix of dread and relief. "I've got something," he said. "It looks like he's been staying at a hotel on the other side of town for the past month. Paid in cash. No trace of him leaving town." I was stunned. All this time, he had been so close, yet so far out of reach. Staying in a hotel, living a separate life while I was drowning in the wreckage of our marriage. I thanked Phil and hung up, my mind racing. Should I go to him? Confront him? Demand an explanation? Or should I let him go, knowing that this was probably the life he wanted now? The thought of seeing him again filled me with anxiety, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to try, at least one last time, to reach him, to make him see that we could still salvage something from the wreckage of what we once had. That night, I drove to the hotel. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked outside, staring up at the nondescript building, wondering if Oliver was inside. I had no idea what I would say, how I would react when I saw him, but I couldn't back down now. This was my last chance to fix things, or at least to understand why he had left me in the first place. As I stood outside the door of his hotel room, my hand hovered over the doorbell. My mind raced with 1,000 different possibilities. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want to see me? What if this only made things worse? Taking a deep breath, I pressed the doorbell, my heart hammering in my chest as I waited for him to answer. The door opened slowly, and there he was, Oliver, standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of the past month hanging between us like a thick, oppressive fog. "Emma," he finally said, his voice low and guarded. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed 1,000 things I wanted to say on the drive over, but now, standing in front of him, I found myself speechless. I was overwhelmed by the sight of him, by the reality that he had been hiding away from me for all this time. "I needed to see you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't just let you disappear without knowing why. Why did you leave me like that?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair as he stepped aside, silently inviting me in. The hotel room was small, basic, and lifeless. It was clear he had no intention of making it anything more than a temporary stop. His suitcase sat half open in the corner, and a few of his clothes were scattered across the chair. "Because I didn't know how to stay," he said, his eyes not meeting mine. "After everything that happened, I didn't know how to live in that house anymore, Emma. I didn't know how to be with you." The weight of his words hit me hard. I had known, deep down, that I had pushed him too far, but hearing it from him felt like a knife to the chest. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I never meant for things to get this bad. I thought we could fix it." Oliver shook his head, his expression filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "You thought opening our marriage would fix things, but all it did was destroy us, Emma. You asked for something I couldn't give, and I went along with it because I didn't want to lose you. But in the end, I lost myself." I took a shaky breath, stepping further into the room. "I was wrong, Oliver. I see that now. I made a mistake, and I didn't realize how much it was hurting you until it was too late. But I'm here now, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain I had never seen before. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about what happened. It's about the fact that you wanted something more than what we had, and I was never enough for you. That's what kills me, Emma." My heart shattered at his words. "It's not like that," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "It was never about you not being enough. It was about me, my insecurities, I don't know, my confusion. But I know now that I don't want anyone else. I just want you." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "But it's too late, Emma. You already made your choice. And I don't know if I can come back from that. You broke something between us, something that can't be fixed just because you want it to be." The truth in his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the tears spill over, running down my cheeks as I realized that I might have lost him for good. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Just give me one more chance. We can go to counseling, we can talk it out, whatever it takes. Just don't walk away from me." Oliver stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he turned away, walking to the window and staring out into the night. "I've already walked away, Emma. I left because I needed to find myself again, and I don't think I can do that with you." His words left me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was slipping away, and no amount of apologies could bring him back. The weight of his words crushed me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had come here hoping that seeing him, talking to him, would somehow bridge the distance between us, that it would reignite whatever spark we once had. But standing there, I realized just how far gone we were. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice cracking under the strain. I thought we could still fix this." Oliver turned to face me, his expression softer now, but still filled with the pain of everything that had passed between us. "I've thought about this every single day, Emma. Believe me, I wanted to fix it. But the more time I spent away from you, the clearer it became. What we had, it's gone. We're different people now. You made choices, and I let myself disappear trying to make you happy." I stepped toward him, desperate to reach out, but the look in his eyes stopped me. "So, that's it? After everything we've been through, you're just going to walk away?" He shook his head, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't walk away, Emma. You did. You walked away the moment you wanted something that wasn't us. I can't live like that, pretending we can go back to who we were." Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't care. "But I love you," I cried, my voice shaking. "I love you, Oliver. I don't want to lose you. We can be happy again. I know we can." "I love you too," he said quietly, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. But then he added, "But sometimes love isn't enough." That flicker of hope was snuffed out in an instant, leaving me hollow and broken. The truth of his words hit harder than anything else. Love wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not after everything I had done. We stood there in silence, the space between us feeling like an uncrossable chasm. I had come here hoping for reconciliation, but what I found was the stark reality that no matter how much I wanted to turn back the clock, it wasn't possible. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "I'll be moving on," Oliver said after a long pause, his voice strained. "I'll file for divorce soon. I've already spoken to a lawyer, so we'll figure out the details. I don't want to drag this out." The mention of divorce was like a dagger to my heart. I had known, deep down, that this was coming, but hearing him say it made it real. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "don't do this." But he just shook his head. "It's already done, Emma." I felt my legs give way, and I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my mind spinning. Divorce. The word felt so final, so absolute. It was the end of everything we had built together, the life we had shared, the future I had once envisioned. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "But this is what's best for both of us." I wanted to scream, to shout, to beg him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. I was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, physically. I had pushed him too far, and now I had to face the consequences. "I'll be in touch," Oliver said softly, before turning and walking out the door. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty space where he had stood. The silence was deafening. I was alone, truly alone, and the reality of it hit me like a tidal wave. There was no going back, no second chances. Oliver was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I had destroyed. After Oliver left the hotel room, the reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. The word divorce echoed in my mind, reverberating with a finality that made my stomach churn. He was really gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring him back. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty space where he had stood, but it felt like hours. Eventually, I forced myself to stand, my legs weak beneath me as I walked out of the hotel and into the cold night air. Every step felt heavy, like I was dragging the weight of my broken heart behind me. The drive home was a blur, the city lights passing by without registering in my mind. When I finally reached my house, everything felt wrong. This place was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where we built a life together, but now it was just an empty shell, a monument to what we had lost. Days turned into weeks, and I barely left the house. The divorce papers came, just as Oliver had promised. Seeing my name on those documents, next to his, was like a punch to the gut. My hands shook as I signed them, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to rip them up, to pretend like none of this was happening, but it was futile. Oliver had made his decision, and I had no choice but to accept it. Once the paperwork was filed, I fell into a deep depression. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from friends and family. The world around me felt distant, like I was watching it from behind a thick pane of glass. I couldn't find the energy to care about anything anymore. One night, I found myself scrolling through old pictures of Oliver and me, back when we were happy. There were photos from vacations, holidays, and quiet nights spent at home. Every image was a reminder of what I had lost, of the love that I had taken for granted. I had ruined everything, and now I had to live with the consequences. But it wasn't just the loss of Oliver that weighed on me. It was the loss of myself. Somewhere along the way, I had become someone I didn't recognize. The person who had once been so full of life, so sure of her place in the world, was now a shadow of who she used to be. I had pushed away the one person who truly loved me, all because I had been searching for something that didn't even exist. As the weeks passed, I knew I had to make a decision. Stay in this pit of despair, or try to find a way to move forward. The thought of living without Oliver was unbearable, but I couldn't keep living like this either. I had to rebuild my life, even if it meant starting from nothing. I reached out to a therapist, knowing that I couldn't navigate this alone. The first few sessions were brutal, talking about the choices I had made, the ways I had hurt Oliver, and the guilt that consumed me. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand why I had done what I did. It wasn't about Oliver not being enough. It was about me, my insecurities, my fear of losing control, my need for validation. I had been looking for something outside of myself to fill the void, when all along, the answers had been inside me. But by the time I realized that, it was too late. Therapy became my lifeline. With each session, I started to unpack the layers of guilt and regret, trying to understand how I had gotten to this point. It was a slow process, but I could feel myself starting to heal, starting to see a future where I wasn't defined by the mistakes of my past. But no matter how much progress I made, there was still a part of me that would always wonder, what if? What if I had never asked for an open marriage? What if I had realized sooner that Oliver was all I needed? What if I had fought harder to save us? Those questions haunted me, but I knew I couldn't live in the past forever. Oliver was gone, and I had to find a way to live without him. The months that followed were a time of painful introspection. I slowly began the process of rebuilding my life, though it often felt like I was starting from scratch. Every step forward felt like a monumental effort, and I had to remind myself constantly that healing wasn't a linear path. Some days I felt stronger, like I was beginning to find myself again, and other days, I was right back in the dark, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Therapy helped. My therapist, Dr. Morgan, was patient, understanding, and unafraid to challenge me. She made me confront the choices I had made, the reasons behind them, and the ways I had let my fears drive a wedge between Oliver and me. There was no sugarcoating it. I had made a series of selfish decisions that led to the downfall of my marriage, and I had to live with that. But more than just focusing on the guilt, Dr. Morgan helped me start to rebuild my sense of self. She made me see that I couldn't let this mistake define the rest of my life. I had to learn from it, grow from it, and most importantly, forgive myself. That was the hardest part, accepting that I had failed, but also realizing that it didn't mean I was beyond redemption. I slowly began re-engaging with the world. I went back to work, though it felt strange at first, seeing my coworkers and pretending that everything was normal. They knew, of course. Rumors had spread, and people tiptoed around me, unsure of how to approach the woman who had lost everything. But I didn't care about the whispers. I was there to do my job, and gradually, it became a welcome distraction from the thoughts that plagued me at home. My family, especially my mother, had been my rock through it all. She called me every day, checking in, making sure I wasn't isolating myself again. At first, her concern felt like a weight around my neck, a constant reminder of my failure. But over time, I came to appreciate her persistence. She was trying to show me that I still had value, that I wasn't beyond saving, even if I felt like I was. "Emma," she said one evening during one of her check-in calls, "you've been through hell, but you're stronger than you know. You made mistakes, yes, but everyone does. The important thing is that you're learning from them. Don't let this be the end of your story." Her words resonated with me, though I wasn't sure I believed them at the time. How could this not be the end? Everything I had built with Oliver was gone. The life I had imagined, the future we had planned together, was nothing more than ashes now. But even in the wreckage, I knew she was right. This couldn't be the end of my story. I had to pick up the pieces and move forward, even if I didn't know where that path would lead. I began reconnecting with old friends, people I had pushed away during the last few years when my focus had been so narrowly set on the chaos I had created. Some were hesitant, unsure how to approach the new, wounded version of me. Others welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked, happy to see me reemerge from the isolation I had buried myself in. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when I lay awake, replaying everything that had happened, wondering if Oliver thought about me at all or if he had already moved on. I tortured myself with those thoughts, imagining him finding happiness with someone else, building a new life that I was no longer a part of. But little by little, I began to accept that my happiness couldn't depend on him anymore. I had to find it within myself. As the months continued to pass, I began to notice small shifts within myself. The deep, soul-crushing despair I had felt when Oliver left was still there, but it was no longer the constant companion it had once been. The wounds were healing, slowly but surely, even if the scars remained. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of moving forward after all. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, taking on new responsibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. My boss noticed, giving me praise I hadn't expected. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step in the right direction, like I was regaining control over at least one part of my life. My evenings, though, were still the hardest. Coming home to an empty house, our house, was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. But even there, I found small ways to cope. I started redecorating, changing the look and feel of the rooms that had once felt like a prison. I repainted the walls, bought new furniture, and created a space that was mine, rather than a painful echo of the life I had shared with Oliver. One day, as I was clearing out an old box of keepsakes, I found a notebook I hadn't seen in years. It was from when Oliver and I had first started dating, a collection of letters we had written to each other when we were long distance. My heart clenched as I flipped through the pages, reading his words of love and commitment, back when we believed nothing could ever come between us. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. It felt like a relic of a past life, one that I would never get back. But as I sat there, I realized something. I didn't want to forget those memories. Even though things had ended in a way I never expected, those early days with Oliver had been real, and they had meant something. I didn't need to erase them to move on. That night, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to reflect on the good parts of our relationship. The nights we had spent laughing, the trips we had taken, the moments that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. I had been so focused on the pain and guilt that I had forgotten that we had shared something beautiful once, even if it hadn't lasted. As I closed the notebook and placed it back in the box, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe I wasn't ready to let go of everything, but I could start to make peace with the past. I didn't have to erase it to move forward. I just had to learn how to live with it. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I could build from here. It wasn't easy, but I could feel the glimmer of hope starting to grow inside me, faint but steady. Maybe in time, I would be okay. I began making more plans with friends, going out for dinners, and catching up on the lives I had missed while I had been consumed by my own. It felt strange at first, but I slowly started to feel like myself again. Or at least, a new version of myself. I wasn't the same person I had been before the open marriage, before the breakup, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. One evening, while out with a close friend, she turned to me and said, "You seem different. Lighter, somehow. It's good to see." Her words took me by surprise. I hadn't realized that the weight I had been carrying was finally lifting, piece by piece. "I guess I'm starting to figure things out," I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in a long time. "It's not easy, but I'm getting there." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. For the first time since Oliver left, I felt like I was truly on the path to healing. The glimmer of hope that had started to flicker inside me grew stronger with each passing day. It was slow, almost imperceptible at times, but I was beginning to see that life could go on, even without Oliver. I wasn't entirely over the heartbreak, but I was learning to live with it. I was learning to live with myself. One of the biggest challenges was rediscovering who I was outside of my relationship. For so long, my identity had been tied to Oliver, to the life we had built together. But now that I was alone, I had to figure out who Emma was on her own terms. It was daunting, but also strangely liberating. I started picking up hobbies I had long abandoned. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I spent weekends at art galleries, losing myself in the colors and brushstrokes, finding inspiration in the work of others. It felt like a new beginning, one that was entirely mine. I also threw myself into fitness. I joined a yoga class, something I had never had time for before. At first, it was just a way to clear my head, to focus on something other than the gnawing ache in my chest. But over time, it became a source of strength. With each stretch, each breath, I felt myself getting stronger, both physically and mentally. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was rebuilding myself. There were still difficult moments, of course. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sometimes feel the weight of the loneliness settle back in. Memories of Oliver would flood my mind, and I'd find myself wondering where he was, what he was doing, if he was happy without me. But I was learning how to manage those thoughts, how to let them come and go without letting them consume me. One night, I received a message from a mutual friend who had heard from Oliver. He had moved to a new city, started a new job. There was no mention of him seeing anyone new, but the thought of him building a life without me stung, even if I knew it was inevitable. I thanked the friend for letting me know, but I didn't dwell on it. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to reach out, to chase after answers. I was coming to terms with the fact that Oliver was on his own journey now, just as I was on mine. The milestones I reached in my healing process were small, but they mattered. I found joy in little things: a sunny day, a good cup of coffee, a conversation with a friend. I started planning for the future again, setting new goals for myself, dreaming of a life that wasn't defined by my past mistakes. I even started traveling on my own. I had always loved the idea of exploring new places, but I had never done it alone. My first solo trip was to a small beach town a few hours away, and though it was terrifying at first, it was exactly what I needed. I walked along the shore, the sound of the waves crashing in the background, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. As I sat by the ocean, watching the sun set over the horizon, I realized something profound. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I could stand on my own. I could be happy on my own. This journey, my journey, was far from over. There were still wounds that needed healing, still moments of doubt and sadness. But I was no longer running from the pain. I was facing it head-on, and with each day, I was growing stronger. I knew that my story wasn't just about loss. It was about resilience, about finding the strength to rebuild after everything had fallen apart. And while I didn't know exactly where the path ahead would lead, I knew I was finally ready to walk it on my own. Months had passed since that pivotal night by the ocean, and I was slowly stepping into a new phase of my life. One where I wasn't defined by the mistakes I'd made or the relationship I had lost. The process of rebuilding had been long and arduous, but I was finally starting to see the beauty in the life I was creating on my own. I had learned so much about myself, about what I needed, what I wanted, and most importantly, what I was capable of. There was a strength inside me that I hadn't known existed, and with every step forward, I was proving to myself that I could survive anything life threw my way. One afternoon, as I was sipping coffee at my favorite cafe, I ran into an old friend, someone I hadn't seen since before everything had fallen apart. We chatted for a while, catching up on life, and it felt good. It felt normal. There was no awkwardness, no pity, just a genuine connection. I realized then how much I had grown, how much I had changed. "I heard about what happened with Oliver," she said cautiously, as if afraid to bring up the past. I smiled softly, not feeling the sting that usually came with his name. "Yeah, it was rough," I admitted, "but I've been working on myself. I'm doing better now." She looked at me for a moment, her eyes full of curiosity. "You seem happier," she said, "lighter, like you've found peace." I thought about that for a moment, and to my surprise, I realized she was right. I had found peace, not in forgetting Oliver or pretending the past didn't happen, but in accepting it. I had accepted that I couldn't change the decisions I had made, but I could learn from them. I had accepted that Oliver and I were on different paths now, and that was okay. "I think I have," I replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "It took a while, but I'm finally learning to be happy again." And it was true. I had found a new rhythm in my life, one that wasn't dictated by the weight of guilt or regret. I was living for myself now, not for anyone else's expectations. It was freeing in a way I had never anticipated. As the months turned into a year, I found myself more at ease with the person I had become. I made new friends, took on new challenges, and even started dating again. Not because I needed someone to complete me, but because I was ready to share the new version of myself with the world. But the most important relationship I had cultivated was the one with myself. I learned how to enjoy my own company, how to find fulfillment in the simple joys of life. I was no longer looking for validation from others or trying to fill a void. I had filled that void on my own, with my own strength, my own resilience. There were still moments when the memories of Oliver would surface, but they no longer held the power they once did. I no longer felt the ache of loss or the sting of regret. Instead, I felt gratitude for the love we had shared, for the lessons I had learned, and for the person I had become because of it all. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized just how far I had come. The woman who had once been lost, confused, and consumed by her own mistakes had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more at peace than ever before. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But I had found a way to embrace the imperfections, to accept the messiness of it all, and to move forward with hope. I had learned that even in the face of heartbreak and loss, there was always the possibility of a new beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for following this journey with me. Have you ever had to rebuild after a heartbreak? I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories like this.